Yeah, mate, your 2 minutes there.
Well, firstly, can I say thank you to everybody for the constructive way in which you've all worked with us on what are clearly very difficult issues. At the first mayoral election, I made a commitment to bring about a major cut in the greenbelt take. And the difference between 2016 and 2019 with the GMSF drafts was a 50% reduction, over 50% in the greenbelt take. Now, don't underestimate how difficult that was. Part of it was achieved by asking councils to build more in town centres, but also I wouldn't accept the government's insistence that we should set a higher number to get a housing deal, 227,000. I went for a lower number because I wouldn't be blackmailed, but nevertheless we then lost the housing deal, but I still did it anyway, and that allowed us to achieve the reduction. So that's where we are at the moment. I would have gone further had the government also not insisted that we use the 2014 population numbers, and they are still insisting that we do that. So that's the situation that we're in. With all the uncertainty that was around, I didn't think it was right to push on. I could have tried to bulldoze this through. It might have been politically better for me to do that, but I'm not doing that. I want to still work with you to get this plan as best as we can get it, to balance the need for development against protecting as much of the greenbelt as we can. I'm still listening. On the back of the consultation, I will make further changes to the greenbelt when this plan comes back out for consultation later this year. At least a further 10% reduction. If we were to get a housing deal back, i.e. brownfield clean-up funding, and if we were to get movement on the 2014 figures, I would go even further. Let me just finish by saying I'll resist calls to scrap the greenbelt, the GMSF, because if we did that, 5 of our boroughs would have to build more homes than they are currently doing through the GMSF, and it would put greenbelt at risk across all of our 10 boroughs. It's right to have this plan. It is the best way of meeting our needs, and what I would say is it also puts us in a strong position with a strategic plan to get the infrastructure investment the government is promising.
Just about right.
Well, I was doing precisely that yesterday. I was meeting one of our new Conservative MPs, asking for his help to unlock brownfield funding. So I'm doing that, and I'm meeting the others as well. I want them to put pressure on the government. Let's be clear, the GMSF 2019 had a clear policy of brownfield first, and I put that policy in the GMSF 2019. By the way, it also had a policy of a presumption of a ban on fracking, and I think that moved the debate in the right direction on that. It also set 2028 for all developments in Greater Manchester to be zero carbon. So let's not get in the mindset that the GMSF is all bad. It's doing some very strong, progressive environmental policies. But the argument is brownfield, and we do need to unlock more brownfield sites. I'm in discussions with Network Rail to unlock some Network Rail sites in Rochdale. We've got to be in the real world. What actually can we do to get sites released by the time we have to go back out for consultation? And I can assure you that I'm doing everything I can, including working across party lines to get MPs supporting us in the call on the government in the budget to unlock more funding for brownfield clean-up. And the reason I've delayed going out for consultation again is for precisely this reason, so that we know our best offer from the government, and therefore we can maximise the use of brownfield. It's not as easy as saying we can use every brownfield site, because some of them are just way beyond the costs that we've got to clean up. And there's a site in Turner Brothers site in Rochdale, which would be a prime example of that. We've got to live in the real world. I am doing everything I possibly can to put that brownfield first policy into effect. Well, I want to assure you it's exactly what we are doing, and that is in the current draft, that we should release brownfield first, and that is the policy. And if we can strengthen it further to make that clearer in every borough, then I will do. Just to put kind of evidence behind what I'm saying, I've set up the first mayoral development corporation in the country focused on a town centre, Stockport, because we want to build more for public transport rather than the car. We want to see more building in town centres. Bolton are building more in their town centre. There's a plan for Farnworth as well. So we are moving the whole thing in that direction. And as we go to the next draft, I'll be saying to all 10 councils, we want more and more in town centres so that we're building for public transport. We have a plan for 30,000 homes for social rent across Greater Manchester, 50,000 truly affordable, and that's where I want those homes to be. So we are doing that. I think the point you're making could be strengthened further, but this question of viability, Andy's right to raise it. That is often the issue. Brownfield first until you can find out whether it's viable because of the clean-up costs. And this is why I hope, we can turn this debate away a bit from big bad GMSF and big bad GM, more to the government. It was outrageous that they removed the housing deal from Greater Manchester when I wouldn't build above housing need. That's what they did. They tried to blackmail us to build above housing need. And that is just wrong. They should be giving us the funding to clean up those brownfield sites. The funding is being given in London and the South East to do it. They're not doing it here. And that is one point, hopefully, where there's common agreement in this room. Let's turn it back on the government. Help us clean up those brownfield sites, build the public transport, not the car, build more affordable, higher density developments in those areas. That surely has got to be a big part of the answer.
Okay, thank you. I'll take one more supplementary. Gentleman in the centre there.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's a chance at this next draft to make it a better framework.
Yeah.
And I think maybe controversial in this group that we've been part of for a couple of years, it is shaping. But as a property developer, one thing that I think you've got a chance to do is actually get a few gamekeepers to poach you. I bought 53 acres of contaminated brownfield land in the Yorkshire Dales in 2006. I didn't get any funding for that, and that has all been offset against my taxation. So it's the biggest fallacy. If you get the brownfield funding, happy days. If you don't, it still goes on my P&L as cost. So I think sometimes we feel a little bit too sorry for property developers. And also, not all brownfield is contaminated. So I think we walk into this equation thinking everything's equal, and it's not. But I think lastly to that gentleman's point, if you take the example of Taylor Woodrow, Taylor Wimpey, they've spent close to £3 million since draft 2 of the GMSF just on concept plans. They have focused not on brownfield, they've focused on the assumption that you're going to release the greenbelt as part of the first draft. So what's perverse is, over this 19-year period, if you can produce policy that says brownfield until 15 years in, and then we come back to it for that final 4 years, and if, and only if, market forces have not kicked in. Because as soon as this starts, we as property developers will all be going to the bank to say, this is open. And the assumption right now is when you open the doors is the market forces stop, and the current land bank is what it is. So I just think a policy, and that this could be something that nationally we could lead on, that says we don't mean brownfield first in the old speak, which is you're going to play the system. We mean it's brownfield until it's run out.
Andy Burnham?
I think it's a really constructive suggestion. In fact, both suggestions, and certainly something for me to look at. The issue I would just put alongside it is that the supply of brownfield varies from borough to borough. So it's not that every borough's got plentiful brownfield. It's often more, let's say, former industrial boroughs that would have more. Rochdale would have more. Oldham, Wigan might have more. Bury doesn't have much. And hence Bury is, I think there needs to be changes in Bury, by the way. When I said I want to see that 10% reduction, I am very much thinking of Bury in that, because I think the plan isn't right for Bury at the moment. But I'm interested in your idea, and I'm interested as to how we can, the whole point of GMSF should be to protect the 10 and GMCA against them being picked off by individual developers using their legal muscle. And I'm interested in the GM policies that can kind of strengthen us all together against that kind of approach. And I find what you said really, really constructive, to be honest. But I just have to work out how it applies in all 10 boroughs and across the piece. But it is a good idea. It was actually, to be honest, is it a myth we've got to get away from, that everyone's building 4-bedroom properties for people who don't live here? That just isn't the case. We have moved this much more towards town centres, brownfield, mixed development, and it could go even further. So I've offered the other boroughs a Mayoral Development Corporation, because I think that might be helpful to your industry, to say, look, we're going to get a master plan here, we're going to kind of get a strategic view of development rather than the piecemeal development we often see. And hopefully more of them will begin to take that up. I think there's a case for a Mayoral Development Corporation in Radcliffe, for instance, to pick up some of the issues that I was just alluding to around the plans in Bury. So, all of these things are on the table. And as I say to you, I hope you'll see now in the way I've worked with you since we began that this isn't being bulldozed through. I mean, I could have tried to do that. And it might have been, I said at the beginning, politically easier to do that in some ways. But I haven't done that. because I'm still working with you to try and get this thing as right as I can make it.
Okay, hold it there. Thank you. What do you do to ensure there are no further bills on floodplains in Greater Manchester? And the first one, Andy Burnham, will you take this one first, please?
Yeah, I when I go back to my time as Member of Parliament for Leigh, I often opposed building on the floodplain. And don't see how it can be supported. I think we've seen pictures in the news this week, haven't we, of homes recently built that have been flooded. And they say a 1 in 100 year flood. Well, we're seeing these 1 in 100 year floods every 2 or 3 years at the moment. So I do think, as we look again at the GMSF, the issue of building on floodplains needs to be also looked at again. And it's wrong. It's actually deeply immoral in some ways to build homes that we know might have a strong chance of flooding. That simply is unacceptable. I remember in Hindley, where I used to represent, there was a new estate that was completely flooded, brand new homes. And we know sometimes that the developers will just go straight in. They don't particularly care because they won't be picking up the pieces later down the line. So I have had direct personal experience of these things, and I can give an assurance today that every single site that's in the GMSF that is a floodplain should be looked at again in the light of the latest climate advice as to the changes that we're seeing.
Thank you. Andy Kelly.